Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Pakistan has suffered surgical strikes again. Not from India this time, but from its western neighbour, Iran. It carried out aerial strikes in two places in Pakistan and did so just hours after a handshake between leaders of Iran and Pakistan in Davos. Needless to say, Islamabad is livid. But will it respond with force? Also, why did Iran strike in the first place? Why is their relationship with Pakistan strained? Tonight we'll discuss all this and more. In the Red Sea, a new armada may join the fighting. The Europeans have finally woken up. And the war that triggered this crisis is spilling. Israel is attacking targets in Lebanon. Does it want to wage war with the Hezbollah now? Closer to home, new details have emerged about India's border standoff with China. Turns out Galwan was not the only skirmish. There were at least two more that followed. The Maldives is turning to Turkey for drones and food. What does this mean? Oil giant Shell is selling its business in Nigeria. We'll tell you why. France and China are struggling with shrinking populations for different reasons. Women's health gap costs the world $1 trillion annually. We'll explain. Why does an Austrian heiress want to give away her wealth? Is this a stunt? And why sibling rivalry is good for children. We'll tell you what science says. The headlines first. The US hails India's success story. Antony Blinken says Prime Minister Modi's policies have greatly benefited Indians. The US Secretary of State was speaking at the World Economic Forum.
We see an extraordinary success story, and we see the remarkable achievements that Prime Minister Modi has, a relationship between our countries that is in a new place, at a new level.
No such good news for President Xi Jinping. China sees one of its worst years of growth since 1990. Last year, China's economy grew at one of its slowest rates in over 3 decades. The property crisis, sluggish consumption and global turmoil have stalled Beijing's recovery. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will travel to New York next week to attend the United Nations Security Council meeting. Lavrov will take part in a debate on the Israel-Hamas war. He'll also attend a meeting on Ukraine, which has been initiated by Moscow. Situation tense in Comoros, the archipelago island nation in the Indian Ocean. Police fire tear gas on protesters opposing the president's re-election. The opposition wants the results to be declared void. The president won a 4th term in Sunday's election. In 2023, cocaine seizures in Antwerp hit a record high. South American drug cartels often use the Belgian city to enter Europe. Around 116 tons of cocaine were seized in Antwerp last year. Most of it came from Ecuador. And this could be Ripley's Believe It or Not. A US-bound all-Japanese plane was forced to return to Tokyo. Why? Because a drunk American passenger bit a flight attendant and injured her. Two weeks back, 2 bombs went off in Iran. 90 people died. It was a suicide attack. One of Iran's deadliest in decades. Tehran vowed retaliation, and today they did just that, retaliate. Iran struck Pakistan. It bombed targets on 2 sites in Pakistan, and the timing could not have been more interesting. Let me show you 2 pictures that came out this week. The first shows India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar with Iran's President Raisi. They met in Tehran. The second picture shows Pakistan's caretaker Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister of Iran. They met in Davos. And just hours after the handshake in Davos, Iran attacked Pakistan. It was a surgical strike, like I said, on 2 sites in Balochistan. The target was a terrorist group, the Jaish Al-Adl, also known as the Army of Justice. A lot of you may have heard it for the first time, but it won't be the last. You'll hear more about this group in the days ahead because Iran and Pakistan are at odds. Pakistan has recalled its ambassador to Iran and asked Tehran to not send the Iranian envoy. The diplomat has been expelled. Pakistan was planning high-level visits to Iran. Obviously, they've also been suspended. You see, for Pakistan, these strikes are an embarrassment, more for the military than for the government. They were caught unaware. And right after this meeting in Davos, Iran fired its missiles. So today, the Pakistani leader faced some questions. He's still in Davos. He was asked what Islamabad will do next. He walked away without an answer.
The Iranian foreign minister warned you about the strikes this morning?
Will you respond, sir? How will Pakistan respond, sir?
Your country suffers a surgical strike and you cannot even utter words of condemnation. That's where Pakistan is right now. You saw their leader. This is the result of using terrorism as a state policy. You have virtually no defense. Pakistan's terrorist groups pose a threat not just to India but also to the region and the world, and that includes Iran. They share a border with Pakistan, a 900-kilometer long border, and along this border is the Pakistani province of Balochistan. That's where Iran conducted airstrikes. Reports say both drones and missiles were used. The target was a village where terror group Jaish Al-Adl has its bases. The operation was conducted by the IRGC, that's Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, the armed force of the Iranian regime. And this is very similar to what India did in 2019, the surgical strikes in Balakot. Those were in retaliation to the Pulwama terrorist attack, a suicide attack which killed 40 Indian security personnel. So India responded with surgical airstrikes. Today, Iran has done the same. Earlier this month, Iran came under attack, suicide attacks in Kerman, on the death anniversary of Qasem Soleimani, the celebrated Iranian general. A large crowd had gathered to pay their respects. The explosions took place near his grave. More than 90 lives were lost. Reports say today's attacks in Pakistan are in response to this, and that Jaish Al-Adl could be among the perpetrators. This, like I said, is a terrorist group active near the Pakistan-Iran border and an old enemy of Tehran. Fundamentally, their fight is about religion. Jaish Al-Adl is a Sunni group. Iran is a Shia power. The group says it wants to break up Iran, to separate Sistan-Balochistan from Iran. Sistan-Balochistan is a province in eastern Iran. The terror group Jaish Al-Adl has a safe haven in Pakistan, and from there they have launched attacks on Iran in the past too. They began in fact in 2013, and in the last 10 years they've targeted Iran's border security, Iranian government officials and Shia Muslims in the country. And they've used all kinds of methods: suicide bombings, kidnappings, ambush attacks, hit and runs. And of course, Iran has not just stood by and watched. It has launched counter operations. In 2014, there were skirmishes at the border. Jaish Al-Adl targeted Iranian security personnel. They kidnapped 4 Iranian border guards. So Tehran launched a cross-border operation. It sent a team of 30 border guards. They crossed into Pakistan and took hostages. It led to the death of 1 Pakistani soldier. And in all these years, Tehran has pushed Islamabad to do more, to act against these terrorists. But just like India, Iran too faced disappointment and betrayal. Pakistan refused to act against Jaish Al-Adl, and now it has morphed into a far more dangerous outfit. It's being linked to the Islamic State, specifically the ISIS-K, Islamic State Khorasan. Now, ISIS-K is based in Afghanistan, but its presence in Pakistan is also growing, and Jaish Al-Adl has emerged as one of its affiliates. They have a lot in common. Both are Sunni groups, both have a history of targeting Iran. So they're natural allies and apparently working together now. Remember, the Islamic State took responsibility for the bombings in Iran earlier this month. Reports say the ISIS-K executed the attack with the help of Jaish Al-Adl. Tehran has not made any evidence public yet, but it seems to be convinced about this link. As for Pakistan, it says it will respond to Iran's strikes, but it doesn't really have any good options. Today's attacks confirm that Iran does not trust Pakistan anymore. It is taking matters into its own hands and launching missiles deep into Pakistan to neutralize terror camps. This operation may not be the last of its kind. Guess who's woken up after all this chaos? The European Union. Suddenly, they're worried about the Red Sea, about the escalating violence. So what is Brussels doing? They're preparing an armada. The EU's political wing has approved the proposal. It aims to send warships to the Red Sea. Now, the details are sketchy. EU diplomats are hoping to set up the mission by the 19th of February. That's when EU foreign ministers will meet. Until then, it's all backroom work, like pushing the proposal through parliaments, deciding who will send warships, and also picking the mission leaders. Reports say the big three will kick things off. That's France, Germany and Italy. France and Italy already have warships in the Red Sea. Germany is sending a frigate, so chances are more deployments will follow. But who will command this armada? Who will lead it? Will they submit to the US-led coalition? Initial reports say no. This is going to be a 100% European mission. The money will come from EU, the warships will come from EU, and EU leaders will be in command, which brings us to the scope of this mission. Is it to patrol, protect, or attack? Again, there is no clarity because the European Union itself is divided. Let's look at some recent developments. Last week, the US and the UK launched missiles at Houthi targets. 10 nations supported that mission. Among them were Germany, the Netherlands, and Denmark. But other EU members stayed away, like Italy, Spain, and France. Listen to French President Emmanuel Macron's justification for this.
France decided not to join a coalition that sought to carry out or had carried out preemptive strikes against the Houthis on their soil. Why? Precisely because we have a stance that seeks to avoid any escalation, but we are present to preserve the freedom of navigation.
So Macron won't support strikes. He wants to defend against the Houthis, not attack them. Honestly, it's a tough call. If you attack the Houthis, you get a target on your back. Just look at the Americans and the British. They hit back against the Houthis, but now their ships are being targeted.
The Yemeni armed forces consider all American and British warships and vessels participating in the aggression against our country as hostile targets within the bank of targets of our forces.
So attacking is risky, but so is standing by. The Red Sea is an important trade route. It carries around 12% of global trade. Also, 40% of this trade is between Asia and Europe, of the trade through the Red Sea. And a lot of that is energy supplies. Europe used to buy gas from neighboring Russia. But after the Ukraine war, that stopped. So the European Union looked elsewhere, like Qatar, for example. Qatar shipped 75 million metric tons of LNG in 2023. LNG is liquefied natural gas. Qatar exported 75 million tons of it last year. And out of this, 14 million went to Europe. But now there's a problem. Qatar is ditching the Red Sea. Their state-owned firm, Qatar Energy, won't use the route anymore. They want to wait and watch how the situation evolves. If the attacks continue, they could sail around Africa, which means more time, more cost. And this has spooked Europe. Their trade chief recently warned of disruptions. Listen to this, and I'm quoting, "The effects on oil and gas prices are contained, but certainly this is a risk for the European economy, which we need to follow very closely." Days later, the EU is preparing an armada. What does that tell you? That Brussels is spooked. And it's not just energy. Most goods coming from Asia could become more expensive, like coffee. Europe's coffee beans come from Vietnam and Indonesia. They take the Red Sea route. But now container prices are surging. It's almost 150% higher in the Asia-Europe route. As a result, the EU is looking elsewhere, like Brazil and Uganda. Despite that, the outcome is the same: more expensive coffee. Now imagine this happening to all consumer goods. What will be the result? Higher inflation, and that's what Europe is scared of. They spent most of 2023 battling inflation. Some countries like Germany are in recession. So they cannot afford more inflation. They need seamless trade. It's also a lesson in strategic dependence. Europe first bet on Russia. Around 40% of their gas was sold by Moscow. But when Putin invaded Ukraine, that bet unraveled. Europe's gas prices shot up. And now the same thing is happening again. Most European ports depend on the Red Sea. As a result, trade is down. EU exports dropped 2% in December. EU imports fell 3.1%, which is why Europe is deploying warships. It will add to the military muscle in the Red Sea. But the question is, will it deter the Houthis? There are no indications of a climb down yet. So European armada or not, the danger remains. And not just in the Red Sea, there is danger on land as well. The border between Israel and Lebanon is flaring up. On Tuesday, Israel launched a massive attack. The target was Hezbollah. Some 16 airstrikes pounded Lebanon. They focused on the Suluki Valley. It's a district in the southern part of the country. Israel says it's also a Hezbollah hideout. We don't know about the casualties yet, but the announcement itself is important because Israel never admits special operations, especially those that are carried out across the border. But this time they did. Not only did they announce, they also released footage. Take a look. So Israel launched a cross-border attack and made a rare announcement about it. The question is why? Is Israel trying to send a message to the Hezbollah? If so, what is that message? Let's look at the background first. Hezbollah is a Shia armed group in Lebanon. They work closely with Iran. They also support Hamas in Gaza. So since October, they have clashed repeatedly with Israel, sometimes exchanging gunfire, sometimes launching rockets. One such rocket hit an Israeli home on Sunday. A mother and son were killed. Before that, Hezbollah attacked an Israeli army base. It was a revenge attack. Israel had taken out key leaders inside Lebanon, like Hamas deputy leader Saleh al-Aruri in Beirut and Hezbollah commander Wissam Tawil. Both men were killed in airstrikes. It's what we call a tit-for-tat situation. Israel strikes Lebanon. In response, the Hezbollah strikes Israel. But what if this escalates? What if it leads to another war? And it's not unprecedented. Hezbollah and Israel have fought a war in 2006, and Israel could not win that war. It's something that Hezbollah keeps talking about. They claim to be the first Arab army to beat Israel, and that gives them confidence. Same with weapons. The Hezbollah is not like Hamas. They're much more powerful and prepared. Reports say they have more than 100,000 fighters. They are well-trained and battle-ready. On the other side, Israel can mobilize up to 600,000 soldiers. So on paper, that's a lot more. It's a clear advantage. But if war breaks out, Israel will be fighting on two fronts, in Gaza and in Lebanon. Meanwhile, Hezbollah can focus everything on just one front. And their arsenal is impressive. Some 100,000 rockets, precision bombs, anti-tank, anti-ship and anti-aircraft missiles, and finally drones. Most of these weapons come from Iran. Some of them are homemade. So Hezbollah has the means to wage a war. But will they actually do it? Well, Lebanon's economy cannot handle it. Plus, the Lebanese people are not eager, which is why Hezbollah has been half-hearted. They've lost 130 fighters since October, but they've not escalated. They've let other groups, like the Houthis, do the damage. But if push comes to shove, Hezbollah is ready.
For 99 days, we have been ready for war. We do not fear it. We're not afraid of it, and we will not hesitate when it comes to it. We will accept it. As I said, we will fight in it without limitations or controls.
So will Israel shove? The signs are not good. Israeli politicians have talked about pushing Hezbollah away from the border. Of course, they won't pull back voluntarily. So the end result could be war. American officials are worried about this possibility. They believe Benjamin Netanyahu could attack Lebanon. It would extend his time in office. It would also draw the United States in. I know it sounds like a stretch, but Israeli actions make it a real possibility. You have killed 130 Hezbollah fighters. You have taken out a senior commander, and you have bombed 16 locations in another country. At one point, Hezbollah may decide enough is enough. It's time to escalate. So Israel is currently playing with fire. They can easily manage one front with Gaza, but can they manage another front with Lebanon? US intelligence says no. Washington thinks Israel would struggle to win against Hezbollah, so calmer heads need to prevail. Israel's focus should be on wrapping up the war in Gaza, not starting a new one in Lebanon. And speaking of tense borders, let's talk about India and China. They've been locked in a border standoff for almost 4 years now. This is in the Galwan Valley. In 2020, Chinese troops showed up and attacked Indian soldiers without provocation. For the first time in 45 years, there were fatalities at the border. But you already know all of this. Here's what's new. Galwan was not a one-off. There have been multiple incidents, multiple incursion attempts by the PLA, that is the Chinese army. They tried again in 2021 and 2022, and each time Indian troops pushed them back. Despite the hostile conditions, they've protected India's borders. Since the standoff began, there has been limited news from the border. Usually, we get official statements or rare comments from political leaders. But for the first time, there are details about on-ground operations. They show how serious the challenge from China is. Since Galwan, there have been at least 2 more skirmishes between September 2021 and November 2022. Chinese troops targeted Indian army positions. They wanted to capture posts. What followed was clashes and hand-to-hand combat. And which posts did the PLA target? One was at Shankar Tekri, the second was Atari, and both are along the line of actual control, which is the de facto India-China border. The PLA was unsuccessful. Indian troops pushed them back. Reports say soldiers were injured on both sides. Apparently, Indian troops have been doing more than guarding their posts. They've undertaken reconnaissance missions, and some of them involved going behind enemy lines. And you must hear these stories. One such mission happened in the Sikkim area in the northeast. It involved a major from the Para Special Forces, an elite unit of the Indian Army. This soldier is said to have crossed over to the enemy side and provided a live feed of military movements. He stayed put for 120 hours and tracked every movement, despite the tough weather, not to mention the enemy. Another mission involved crossing into Chinese territory and traveling deep inside. The details or specific outcomes have not been made public. They're classified, but the Indian Army was successful. That's what we understand. And how do we know this? Because this week, the Indian Army awarded its officers, the ones involved in these missions, they were given gallantry awards for their acts of bravery. And these details were part of the citations read out during the ceremony. The video of the ceremony was in public domain, but it has been taken down since. It's not clear why, although the stories are now public and being reported internationally. So why the hesitation in sharing these stories? Perhaps because of what the army chief has said. That's General Manoj Pandey. He spoke about the border standoff last week, and he said that the situation is stable but sensitive. So India needs to be on its guard and not give away any tactical advantage. This is what years of the border standoff has taught us. China talks peace but wages war. When their troops tried to enter India, their diplomats and generals were talking de-escalation. Clearly, China was not sincere. It has no intention to withdraw, so challenges will keep coming. What are India's options? Except for maintaining a large troop presence on the border. Will shining a spotlight on Chinese provocations help? Should New Delhi publicize them? While not every secret is worth telling, some transparency may keep Beijing in check. Our next story comes from the Maldives. The country is going for an India out and China first policy under its new president Mohammad Muizzu. So far, Muizzu has spurned India by going on a state visit to China first. His ministers have insulted the Indian Prime Minister. They're releasing videos with no context, trying to portray India as an enemy nation. And Muizzu has asked Indian troops to leave the islands by the 15th of March. But what next? Being an island nation, the Maldives needs more than what the distant China can offer, like reliable food supplies and security assistance. Until now, India took care of both. China won't be able to help in this regard, but to keep spiting India, Muizzu is looking as far away as Turkey for these essentials. He plans to import food from Turkey, and reports say he's also signed a multi-million-dollar deal for Turkish drones. Here's our report.
The president of the Maldives, Mohammad Muizzu, is shunning India, the island nation's neighbor and steadfast ally. He's trying to tear apart cultural and historical ties, trying to create an imaginary enmity in the hope that the hate will keep him in power. That's the crux of his politics, of his India Out campaign. Muizzu has a key demand, that India withdraw its military presence. More than 70 Indian troops are currently stationed in the Maldives. They are there to operate and maintain aircraft that India had donated to the island nation. The aircraft are used for rescue and reconnaissance missions. But Muizu wants the Indian troops out. He has given a March 15th deadline. This will likely mean an end to Indian-Maldivian military cooperation, like the joint patrols both nations perform in the Indian Ocean. India has always helped the Maldives guard its territory, but that doesn't matter to Muizu. He has a new, expensive alternative in mind: Turkish drones. Reports from the Maldives say that the plan is in motion. Male has already signed an agreement with a Turkish drone maker. It's worth $37 million, or about 569 million Maldivian rupiah. In exchange, the nation will reportedly get at least 3 drones. That's a lot of money for a few drones, but it's a price Muizu seems willing to pay to keep his politics of hate burning. He has already transferred some money from Male's contingency budget. Reports say that all the installments need to be paid by the end of 2024. So what are the people of the Maldives getting for Muizu's politics of fish shaking? A few medium-altitude, long-endurance drones for patrol and search operations. Turkey has become famous for its drones recently, especially the Bayraktar TB2 drones. These drones are manufactured by the company Baykar, and they have consistently proven themselves. They were especially useful for Ukraine against Russian forces, and these could be the drones Male is buying. The Bayraktar TB2 drones cost about $5 to $6 million each. That's without the customizations for an island nation. Those are extra. And the drones also need a $5 million command center to work. So with the $37 million budget, the Maldives could get 5 or 6 of these at best. But that is if the deal is for the TB2s. Another Turkish drone that fits Male's requirements is the Aksungur, made by Turkish Aerospace Industries, or TAI. The company is owned by a Turkish military foundation. The cost of these drones isn't public knowledge, so we don't know how many of them Male will be able to buy with $37 million. What we do know is this: the Maldives is throwing out Indian troops who already help with surveillance and, more importantly, rescue missions. That's not something either of these Turkish drones will do, no matter how many millions you send to Ankara. But it seems Muizu is determined to cut off his nose to spite his face.
We now head to Nigeria, the economic powerhouse of Africa, a former British colony that is about to have an economic decolonization, a partial one anyway. After almost 90 years, 9 decades, Shell is selling its oil drilling business on Nigerian soil. This is the second largest oil company in the world, second only to ExxonMobil. And Shell finally has an exit plan in order. It is selling off its onshore business in Nigeria for about $1.3 billion upfront and $1.1 billion in additional payments. This deal is for a number of assets, including Shell's existing facilities and 18 oil mining leases. The reserves are big, estimated at about 458 million barrels of oil equivalent. 458 million, which translates to a lot of money, way more than what Shell is selling it for. So why are they selling? From the company's perspective, the Nigerian onshore business was a liability. Let me tell you why. In 2008, there were 2 major oil spills. Tens of thousands of barrels of oil were spilled. Locals sued Shell for millions of dollars. In 2015, the company paid the claimants $83 million. In 2021, it paid more than $110 million. The United Nations has asked Shell to clean up its mess. The process is likely to last 30 years and cost over $1 billion. Local environmental groups have also been after Shell, with numerous lawsuits over the oil spills. And not just for the big incidents, for smaller spills as well, regular ones that occur due to theft. People keep stealing oil from Shell's Nigerian operations, and this results in frequent smaller oil spills, which Shell then has to clean up. The oil giant also faces sabotage attempts by locals who want the company to share its wealth and help make up for the damage it caused. So the problems seem unending. And all of this got too much for Shell, which is why they want out of the Nigerian onshore business. They've been trying to do this for about 2 years, and now they finally got their buyers, a consortium of 5 companies. 4 of them are local firms, meaning more of the oil wealth would stay in Nigeria. But it's not exactly a steal for this consortium. These new owners will have to fix the mess that Shell is leaving behind. They will have to assume responsibility for the cleanup work while Shell gets to walk away. It will no longer drill on the Nigerian mainland or in shallow waters near the Niger River Delta. But that wasn't their most profitable venture anyway. Shell won't leave Nigeria completely. This is Africa's largest oil producer after all. The company will just exit the mainland. It will continue to operate in the deep sea, in the Gulf of Guinea. And this mining is more profitable and less at risk from theft or sabotage. Shell also has other businesses in Nigeria. It has a gas supply firm, a solar power unit, and stakes in liquefied natural gas or LNG. So Shell's logo will still be seen in Nigeria after this, but with the sale of the onshore business, a major problem will be dealt with. A problem for both the company and the locals. There's just one last step: approval from the Nigerian government. After that, both Shell and the locals can end their troubled relationship. What's a country's biggest asset? You may think of natural resources or location, and yes, they're both important. But you need people to utilize those assets. You need human resources. Without that, your economy will not take off. It's a challenge that many countries are facing. Those in the West have aging populations. They don't have young working-age people. Some states in Asia face the same challenge. Tonight, we are focusing on 2 of them. France and China both face the same problem, that of a shrinking population, but their reasons and solutions are different. Let's look at France first. The country logged 678,000 births last year. That's 7% down compared to 2022 and 20% down compared to 2020. This is a demographic crisis. This is the lowest French birth rate since the Second World War. At this rate, the population will shrink. So what is President Emmanuel Macron doing? He's reforming parental leave. Right now, parents have 2 sets of leaves. One is the basic maternity leave. The second is an additional leave for 1 year, but it doesn't really pay well. Just a shade over $435 per month in France. Plus, it cuts women off the job market. 1 year of maternity leave. So Macron is proposing radical changes. He wants both parents to be able to spend 6 months with the child, and that too with better pay.
After the extension of paternity leave, I strongly believe that the introduction of a new childbirth leave will be a useful element in such a strategy. Childbirth leave will replace current parental leave. Firstly, it will be better paid. It will allow both parents to be with their child for 6 months if they so wish.
But will it be enough? You see, leaves were not the only issue. Until now, France was doing well demographically. It was the odd one out in Western Europe. The likes of Germany and Italy struggled, but France did not. So what has changed? Let me tell you what a recent poll found. 30% French couples blamed the economy and climate change. 28% said raising children was too costly. So it's not a cultural change. It's not like couples do not want children. In fact, 66% of French people who do not have children want one eventually, 66%. 20% parents would like one more child. So people do want children. But circumstances are preventing them. Things like higher inflation and fears of climate change. At the same time, deaths are falling. We know how good healthcare is nowadays, so most people live longer. In fact, France's death rate dropped 6.5% last year. It's pretty organic though. The state is not stopping people from having children. Neither is it forcing people to have more. Which brings us to China, the other end of the spectrum. China's population has shrunk again. By how much? Around 2 million. The year before that, 2022, also saw a drop. It was the first time China's population shrank in 60 years. Why is it happening? Well, one reason is economic growth. As countries industrialize, their birth rates plummet. It's happened everywhere. But China's turnaround has been quick. Unnaturally quick. And why is that? because it was unnatural. In the 1980s, China implemented the one-child policy. Couples could have only one child. If they had more, they would be fined or punished. As a result, the birth rate dropped. It was around 17 per thousand people in the 1980s. It has now dropped to 6.4. So Beijing is worried. In 2015, they removed the one-child policy. In 2021, they allowed couples to have 3 children, but rules are not the problem now. China's economy is losing momentum. The job market is not what it used to be. Last year, youth unemployment was 21%, meaning 1 in 5 Chinese youth had no jobs. So raising a family is risky. Many Chinese say they don't even have the money to get married.
It's very expensive for us to get married, especially in a big city like Shanghai. For example, if we get married, we need a place to settle down. And having a house is definitely an essential. Very few people, perhaps very few women, would be willing to rent a house with a man, then get married. So in terms of financial ability, it actually puts a lot of pressure on young people, including myself.
That's the problem. Beijing has announced some incentives to boost births, like subsidies and payments, but clearly they've not worked. Either the benefits are not enough or they have not been implemented on the ground. After all, China had other concerns in 2023. Their local governments were running out of money. So maybe child subsidies never really took off. Whatever the reason, it's a huge problem for Beijing because by 2035, they will have 400 million retirees. Old people who do not work, 400 million of them. A, someone has to support them, and B, there is added pressure on healthcare systems. It's bad news for a developing country, worse for a wannabe superpower. China needs young people to feed its war machine. If not, the PLA cannot compete globally, especially not with the US. America's population is still growing. It's expected to peak only by 2080, the US population. So what can the likes of France and China do? Well, Paris has a good chance to course correct. It is an open society, also one of the wealthiest countries on the planet. But China may struggle. They rank 72nd in per capita GDP. France is at 25, so it's easier for France than it is for China. And it's a lesson in demographic policy making. You can force people to have fewer kids, but you can't force them to have more. Do you know what is the average life expectancy? For men, it is 68.4 years. For women, it's 73.8 years. So women live longer than men the world over. But how good is the quality of their life? According to data, it's terrible. Women spend 25% more time in poor health compared to men. And that's costing all of us money. How much? Something close to $1 trillion every year. So what is this health gap? How can we bridge it? And how will it make the global economy better? Our next report tells you.
3.95 billion. That's the number of women in this world, and they all have one problem: poor health. They've all suffered from it at some point in their life. And the situation is so bad that it's costing the global economy $1 trillion every year. Yes, that is the cost of the health gap between men and women. $1 trillion. Women may live longer than men, but what about the quality of life? That is never discussed. It's because of the healthcare system that's designed for men, built by men, and caters to men primarily, which is why women spend a quarter of their lives in poor health. And there are reasons for it. The first is science. Healthcare was built with men in mind, so that results in ineffective treatments for women. Take diseases, for example. Women are diagnosed later than men for 700 diseases. Then there are health devices like asthma inhalers. Studies show they work better for men than women. Now to the data. Women's health data is sparse. Many data sets even exclude important conditions like menstruation. Look at endometriosis. Half of the women living with it haven't been diagnosed. Data gaps underestimate women's health burdens, thus limiting innovation or investment. Then there's care. Women face more obstacles in getting it. They either ignore the condition or are not taken to hospitals. And even if they are, the healthcare given is not enough. And lastly, there's investment. Women's health conditions are not studied enough. There's not enough investment to understand it, which means they are less understood and in the end not treated well. Take the US for example. Every dollar invested in women's health would return $3 in economic growth. Which brings us to the global economy. The women's health gap is costing all of us money, almost $1 trillion annually. How is that? Well, it's pure economics. Women spend 25% more time in poor health. It's the result of a health gap. If that is reduced, their healthy days will go up significantly. Almost an average of 7 days of healthy living for each woman annually. That means they'll be more productive. They will contribute to the workforce more efficiently, and that will boost the economy. And even if you don't consider all health conditions, just take endometriosis and menstruation. They're all related to women. They are both understudied. And if addressed, it could contribute $130 billion globally by 2040, which means addressing the health gap is the need of the hour. This isn't just about men or women or social inequality. This is about money. Money that the economy is losing every year, only because women don't get adequate health care. It's a problem that can be solved because it's not so much what women want, it's more about what they need.
For our next story, let me ask you a question. What would you do if you had $27 million? Buy a new car, a new house, maybe invest? What are the chances that you'll give it away? As unbelievable as it sounds, some people are capable of that, giving away their entire inheritance. Like this Austrian heiress, she's giving away her fortune because she wants to bridge wealth inequality. She thinks she lucked out because of the birth lottery, and now she wants to give it back to society, which makes you wonder, what's with wealthy individuals and giving away money? Is it a gimmick? Do they do it for fame, or do they truly believe in the cause? Here's a report.
Marlene Engelhorn. She's 31. She lives in Vienna. She's of Austro-German descent. She has a fortune of $27 million. And now she wants to give it away. Why? It's her way of fighting wealth inequality. Marlene is a descendant of Friedrich Engelhorn. He's the founder of a German pharmaceutical company called BASF. When her grandmother died in 2022, Marlene inherited millions. But it wasn't a surprise to her. She knew she was going to get it. And she also knew she wanted to give it away. But how will she do it? Will she be like Drake, giving away wads of cash? Or will she go the charity route? Well, Marlene has a plan. And it is a complicated one. Her initiative is called Good Counsel for Redistribution. Anyone could register for it, via phone or online. Out of them, 10,000 Austrians were selected. Engelhorn sent out invitations to them. 10,000 random people. They were asked to fill a survey that will then be evaluated. Out of those 10,000, 50 people will be chosen. They will be from all age groups, states, social classes, and backgrounds. This will be what Engelhorn calls the Good Counsel. They will meet over several weekends at Salzburg. All costs will be borne by Engelhorn. These people will then help her develop ideas to distribute her $27 million. Sounds like a foolproof plan. But is Engelhorn giving away all of her wealth? Well, the answer is no. She will give away most of it, around 90%. But she will still keep a buffer fund for herself. So why is the heiress doing this? Engelhorn believes she is not special, that she just lucked out in the birth lottery. And she has a problem with that. Most heirs, according to her, don't give back to society. Plus, they get tax privileges. All of that doesn't sit right with her. So, she wants to give away her fortune. This decision wasn't part of some sudden divine intervention. Engelhorn has long rallied for taxing the rich, and she isn't the first person to do so. In 2019, Mackenzie Scott gave away almost $6 billion. It was after her divorce to Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. She gave it to hundreds of charitable groups. Then there was American businessman Chuck Feeney. He gave away nearly $8 billion of his fortune. This too was to charity. There is also the Giving Pledge, a philanthropic campaign by two of the world's richest men, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. It calls on the rich to give away their wealth, during their lifetime or after, for humanitarian causes. So why do they do it? Some believe in the cause, in the charities that they donate to. For others, it is about the optics. Who doesn't like charitable people? For people like Engelhorn, it's about bridging the wealth inequality gap. Many have slammed it as a gimmick. But the heiress is determined to follow her path. Question is, what will she do after giving away the money? Get a regular job, says Engelhorn.
Our last story tonight is about rivalry. It is just as inevitable as it is important. Countries have gone to war over it, that's not important. Companies have spouted inventions. Movies have become blockbusters. But perhaps some of the greatest, most interesting rivalries are those between siblings. Cain and Abel, Prince William and Prince Harry, Kim and Kourtney Kardashian, Dexter and Dee Dee. The examples are everywhere, maybe even in your own family. Being a sibling is a fight for survival. When siblings clash, worlds hang in the balance. And important questions are raised like, who started the fight? Who is in the right? Who is the favorite? And maybe the biggest question here is it okay for siblings to squabble? Should siblings be each other's arch enemies? Science has the answer. And this will be news to parents tired of beseeching unruly kids. Sibling rivalry is good for your children. Siblings teach each other how to live with other people, how to work with them. They also provide a crash course on managing emotions like envy, hatred, and anger. Think of it as an early on-the-job training, and research says the benefits are plenty. Sibling rivalries boost mental and emotional development. They increase maturity, enhance social skills like negotiating, persuading, and problem solving, and teach lessons on the subtleties of language. In other words, fighting among siblings is not just inevitable, it can be educational. Of course, if the rivalry gets out of hand, things can get ugly. But if managed well, this rivalry doesn't just leave a positive impact on early development, it is also good for sibling relationships. Research says it strengthens the bond. Children who pick on each other at home are more likely to have each other's back in public. So children can be arch enemies at home, but allies in the world. It can be confusing because sibling bonds are more complex than we'd imagine. When screaming matches between kids reach operatic levels, it is tough to know why they fight, especially because siblings fight so much. Sibling conflict can happen up to 8 times in an hour. The more combative the siblings, the more they argue. And this is more common when kids are of the same gender, and even more when they're less than 2 years apart. And what do they fight about? By the looks of it, everything. A new toy, food, clothes. But siblings aren't fighting for these actual things. Their rivalry serves a developmental purpose, says science. It is called differentiation. It helps children figure out what is special about themselves because children want to be the most special to their parents. For instance, if the elder sibling is a cricket star, the younger will either avoid the sport completely or try to be better at a different cricketing skill than the sibling. This may be so that they get preferential treatment, but it helps shape personalities and interests. It boosts their careers and makes the younger siblings more likely to succeed in some cases. So does the rivalry ever end? It is the worst in early and middle childhood. The conflict decreases into adolescence, and in most cases it levels off. This strengthens connection well into adulthood, and sibling relationships begin to boost overall well-being. But just because the conflict's reduced to a bare minimum doesn't mean the sense of competition really goes away. Kind of like handing your sibling the drink that is less full. Or being okay donating a kidney but not sharing a phone charger. This is just a fact of life, but at least it makes for decent memes that you can passive-aggressively share with your sibling. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In the Red Sea, Yemen's Houthis are not just seizing ships, they're also organizing tours for supporters on the seized ships. In the US, a firefighter risks his life to save a dog from a freezing pond. And if you're cracking an egg or eating noodles in Canada, then beware. It could freeze mid-air amid record-breaking cold conditions. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1945, the Soviet army liberated Warsaw from German occupation. The Red Army entered the Polish capital facing weak resistance from Nazi troops. After hours of fighting, the Germans fled. 85% of the city was in ruins when they left. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
He's trying to bide his space. Just start forward. Pull, guys. Pull.